Lecture 11, The Renaissance. As the introduction to the previous lecture stated, 1453 is the date that can be loosely interpreted as the year when the medieval age ended and the Renaissance began. In 1453, the city of Constantinople was invaded by the Islamic Ottoman Empire. By defeating the capital of the Eastern Christian Empire, the Ottomans brought an end to the eastern portion of the Roman Empire. The western portion of the Roman Empire had previously been overrun and subdued by European barbarians in the 5th century AD. The Greek intellectuals who fled from the defeated lands to the west brought with them their mastery of antiquity, and particularly of Greek philosophy. This introduction of knowledge into the West was a factor in Western civilization experiencing a rebirth, which is what the term Renaissance means. The exaltation of classical thought and practices of the Renaissance came to an end around the time of the French philosopher René Descartes, who is commonly considered as the founder of modern philosophy. His death in 1650 is a convenient date for identifying the end of the Renaissance and the beginning of the modern period, often called the Enlightenment. In this lecture, we will study Renaissance exploration, political centralization, literature, and art. The Age of Discovery. The fall of Constantinople not only helped to spark a reappreciation of antiquity, but also motivated Europeans to discover new, cheaper trade routes, and in the process, new lands. They were incentivized since the Ottoman Muslims, who gained control over the Mediterranean coastal city of Constantinople, charged Europeans a high price to cross over their lands. Prior to 1453, European merchants traveling through land associated with Constantinople in order to reach the Silk Route. The Silk Route brought the merchants to Asian lands where they purchased goods to sell back home. A few of the important European discoverers are Henry the Navigator, King John II of Portugal, Bartolomeo Dias, Vasco da Gama, Christopher Columbus, Ferdinand Magellan, and John Cabot. Prince Henry the Navigator, from 1394 to 1460, was a son of the Portuguese King John I. Inspired by a book about Marco Polo's travels to the Far East, Henry began financing Atlantic Ocean expeditions around Africa. King John II of Portugal, he lived from 1455 to 1495, was also a patron of Portuguese explorers, intent on discovering Atlantic Ocean trade routes. Bartolomeo Dias, from 1451 to 1500, was one such explorer. In February of 1488, Diaz sailed around the southern tip of Africa to land in Mosul Bay. In 1500, Diaz and his ship were tragically lost at sea. Following the route set by Diaz, the fellow Portuguese Vasco da Gama successfully sailed around Africa and on May 18, 1498, landed near Calcutta, India. His journey took over 10 months to reach Calcutta and about 11 months on his way back to Lisbon. The next two explorers, Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan, sailed west instead of east with the hope of sailing around the globe to reach eastern lands. Columbus, 1450-1506, was an Italian explorer who unsuccessfully sought patronage from King John II of Portugal. The Spanish monarchs Isabella I and Ferdinand II, however, agreed to finance his expedition. In sailing westward, Columbus hit a large mass of land unknown to Europeans. He landed in the Bahama Islands off the coast of this land and also landed in both the central and southern parts of this massive landmass that the German mapmaker Martin Waldseemüller in 1507 named America, after the Florentine mapmaker and explorer Amerigo Vespucci. Like Columbus, the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan, 1480-1521, sought patronage from a Spanish monarch, King Charles I. Magellan also tried to sail westward in order to establish an alternate trade route to Asia. He did not attain his goal and died in a battle in the Philippines. After the battle, his expedition continued without him and eventually reached Southeast Asia. Upon returning to Portugal, they became the first to sail around the earth by ship. The Italian Juan Capoto, 1450-1499, like the previously mentioned explorers, was not sponsored by his home country. Instead, he was commissioned by the English King Henry VII. Consequently, Caboto is more commonly known by his Anglicized name John Cabot. Like Columbus, Cabot tried to find a westward passage to Asia. Even though he failed, he did become the first Renaissance European since the Vikings to set foot on land now called Canada. Political centralization. The medieval decentralized, multicentric political arrangement with its overlapping allegiances that often is called feudalism was gradually replaced by a more centralized model, the nation-state. The monarch stood at the center of the nation-state and was the one who increasingly brought unity to his realm. A factor that greatly promoted this new political arrangement was the long-standing tension between England and France, punctuated by multiple wars. A particularly intense expression of their feud is known, somewhat inaccurately, as the 100 Years' War, and is typically considered as beginning in 1337 and ending in 1453, the same year Constantinople fell to the Ottomans. The power struggle between these two countries significantly predates this conflict. The French can be considered the instigators of the conflict, when in 1066 the French Norman king William the Conqueror invaded England and successfully defeated the English during the 1066 Battle of Hastings. A few centuries later, the English king Henry V defeated the French during the 1415 Battle of Agincourt, one of the many battles of the 100 Years' War. The French, inspired by the patriot Saint Joan of Arc, eventually regained control over their lands at the conclusion of the 1453 Battle of Castillon. Their long conflict with the English caused the French people to want a strong man who would ensure that the English or any other country would not be capable of seizing control of their land ever again. This wish was fulfilled in King Louis XI, who greatly centralized the French state and in so doing took away power from feudal lords. Spain is another example of a European country choosing to centralize power in order to resist the threat posed to it by people who had seized control of their lands. Spain, or more properly Hispania, became a Catholic land when the Visigothic Arian king Recared I converted to Catholicism and supported the Third Council of Toledo, which promulgated Catholicism as Spain's religion. Christian rule ended in 712 when the Islamic Umayyad Caliphate defeated Catholic Spain in the Battle of Guadalete. In 1492, Muslim rule overthrown by Queen Isabella I and her husband King Ferdinand II. Isabella and Ferdinand led Catholic Spain in their final battle against the Muslims in the Battle of Granada, and that was Granada. Battle of Granada was 1491 to 1492. Once the Muslims were defeated, Isabella and Ferdinand centralized Spain politically and economically, and one concrete example was their enforcement of common currency. Renaissance literature and art. The political rebirth of the Renaissance coincided with a rebirth in literature and art. The Renaissance admiration of ancient classical culture informed this rebirth. A key Italian scholar who inspired Renaissance artists and scholars to love classical times was the Italian late medieval scholar Francesco Petrarch. Petrarch had such a profound influence that he was dubbed the father of humanism. Petrarch discovered and introduced to the West a number of previously unknown classical works, in particular Livy's History of Rome, Cicero's Letters ad Atticum. When studying the classics, he tried, to the extent that this is possible, to transcend the limitations of his age that he said he disliked by placing himself mentally in the ancient times. And in your transcript, I conclude this lecture with three central artists of the Renaissance known as the Trinity of Great Renaissance Artists: Leonardo da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo. And I then supplement those three great Renaissance artists with Botticelli and Bernini. God bless.